And so if I'm doing 10,000 pedal strokes in a long race, if I could be at that place where there's a lot more strength and stability, and even though I have to pedal faster, I'd much rather be there. And obviously you don't want to go super short. Like you're going to be spinning like a freaking hamster. Like I said in the story, I don't want to be spinning 120 cadence too fast, right?
And you also have to look at the individual. So I'm short. Dan is super tall, right? To expect Dan to use a 155 might be too short for him, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then another thing to think about is hip angle, right? Welcome to ART,
the Adventure Race Training Podcast.
I'm Nick Herf.
And I'm Jason Magnus.
And with years of coaching experience and formal education in human performance, we've helped numerous athletes to achieve their goals and increase their self-efficacy. My background comes from formal graduate level education, coaching a variety of collegiate teams and professional endurance athletes. My athletes range from everyday racers to NCAA All-Americans and multiple world record holders.
And I'm the captain of Team Bend Racing. I've devoted the past 2.5 decades of my life to adventure racing, competing at the top level for over a decade. But I draw a lot of my coaching and training philosophy on my years as a top-level climbing, acrobatics, and highlining coach, essentially trying to minimize the learning curve on notoriously difficult sports. I've also coached a few world champions, so together, Nick and I have some great successes.
Ultimately, we're here to share our knowledge and expertise with the community to help you prepare for your next big race. Our goal is that these conversations provide valuable insights to elevate your adventure.
All right, let's get started.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. Jason and I are here, and we're going to do some quick hits on cycling.
And I'm going to tell a slightly embarrassing story about myself, and then get Nick's kind of feedback on how you guys should train. So I recently I do a lot of indoor cycling, especially in the winter. My wife, Chelsea, is an amazing top cyclist. She just got on this platform. A lot of people use it, but there's a new one that's free called MyWoosh. We don't talk about the ethics of it, but it's free. You can use it. It looks just like Zwift pretty much. And they have a race series where you can get on, and every Sunday night you can race against people around the world. It's like esports. Who knew? I thought the only way you could win money on the computer was like to play Fortnite. Do you play Fortnite, Nick? Don't lie.
No, but I, as a college strength coach, had guys from our esports team come for strength training, which is pretty wild.
So you are an esports coach. I knew this was going to work out. Okay, so there are ways that you can win a lot of money, way more money on esports, but there is actually an esport that is a sport. It's indoor cycling, where they do all this, like, it's really complex. You have to do a power passport. You have to video it all so you can't cheat. You're scale in the middle of the room with an extra 10 kg weight. You have to go through this whole thing, and then they say, thumbs up, we'll let you race. And you have to do this over and over again so that they know what your power production is compared to your weight and your height. So because it's all like actual physics, like they're measuring when you're drafting and when you're downhill speed, wind resistance, and all that stuff. It's crazy.
So they're trying to mirror the physics of what it would be in real life.
Absolutely. They're trying to mirror it. There's all these things. But the nice thing is when you're racing on esports, like everybody's on the same bike. So the bike has the same physics, and then it's just your height, weight, power metrics that are actually changing. And you have to have verifiable 2 power sources. Anyway, Chelsea's been doing this. They put you in a category based on, so you have a chance of winning. So she's racing at a very high category. It's not broken into the prize money yet, but very close. I was like, oh, I'll try this. And so I sign up. I go through all the thing, and I did my first race a few days ago. And the only thing that's horrible is because everything's based out of like the Middle East, this whole, UAE team that is the top team in the Tour de France. They're kind of sponsoring this whole thing. So I had to start my race at 2 a.m. Not ideal, right? And I've only done one race on this platform. So I get on there. There's all these other guys, with the purple jersey on, with your category. And they say go, and everybody goes super hard at the first. And basically, like, it's kind of cool because it's a workout. It's 2 a.m. I'm highly caffeinated, which is not a good idea because my sleep is going to suck afterwards. But I start this race, and only then did I realize that despite having clicked the button that said I wanted virtual shifting, I'm on a trainer that only has 1 cog. Like, so basically, I'm supposed to be able to virtually shift like fake gears 1 through 30, like a normal bike, but For some reason, it wasn't working. I've now entered the race. I've started. Everybody goes super hard, and I have one gear. That's it. I cannot, you can't start the race over. There's 300 racers, and I have one gear. So luckily, it was a fairly flat course, so I didn't even realize it for like the first 8 minutes of zone 580 heart rate, trying to stay in the main pack. And then all of a sudden, like, I get on the slight downhill, and I'm just like at 110 cadence. And then as soon as I hit the first hill, that was like a 5% increase. I'm like standing, at a 40 cadence. So my bike had one gear, and it was a very humbling experience. I got my ass kicked. The nice thing is I also have the excuse that I was the only one, maybe in the history of like road cycling, that has decided to race a high level event on a single speed. And I'll tell you, it was a bad idea. So my cadence varied from at times 120, cadence, to doing the whole hill like a 35 or 40 cadence. So I got to really experience the breadth of what cadence work is, right? I also ended up like third to last in this race, which was, I don't really like finishing that low down, but it just made me want to do it again and also figure out how to shift. And, I think my average heart rate was something like 172 for an hour and 20 minutes, which also means I didn't sleep that well. So I'm not promoting esports cycling because really I don't want any more competition, because apparently I can only beat 2 people in the whole world right now in esports cycling. But what it made me really think about as an athlete is how important understanding cadence and power on a bike and how that could apply to adventure racing, right? Especially in adventure race training. So my first question to you, Nick, is what is your preferred cadence?
It kind of depends a little bit what I'm doing, if I'm mountain biking versus if I'm on a road bike or a trainer, but closer to 80 is kind of like what I'm shooting for often. And then if I'm mountain biking, I'll usually be a little bit higher of a cadence, especially the more technical it gets. I feel like I'm in a higher cadence, and I feel like as I'm hitting bumps and things, I'm able to kind of push through them easier because I'm having more tension and I'm more in a area where I feel I have better like mechanical advantage on it.
Yeah.
On roads where if I'm on flat roads, let's say, I'm going to end up being in or areas where I'm trying to push more power. I'm going to be usually in a lower cadence that I'm going through. And so that's where I'm kind of pushing more into that like 80-ish compared to more technical. I'm upping it a little bit.
Okay, cool. And do you do any training on an indoor?
I do. Yeah. I have one of the Wahoo kicker thingies. Yeah.
Kicker core or whatever.
And I actually was going to, because it's getting winter here where I live. And so I was actually going to hop on and get Zwift again. However, I might check out that new one you were mentioning.
MyWoosh. Just MyWoosh. They basically took the Zwift format, right? It's not quite as good a graphics, but it's still fine. Who cares? You're looking at an avatar,
Yep.
right? And they have a bunch of workouts and training plans and whatnot. So yeah, check it out. Save some money. Have you done some actual cadence training or cadence work on the indoor stuff?
No, not really. Just kind of looking at it and sometimes trying to change it up and kind of stare at it.
So what I would suggest to, athletes that do use the indoor stuff is there are definitely programs. One of the benefits of the erg, like having an erg thing where you're not shifting gears, where you're doing a workout where it's telling you what your wattage is, right? What you can dynamically start to feel is, at a given wattage, say I'm trying to hold 200 watts, right? I have a couple options there. The lower my cadence is, the more power I have to put out per stroke. All right, this is simple math. And the higher my cadence is, the less power I have to put out. So when you start to play with this on a trainer, it's harder to do on a mountain bike, right? But what it does start to do is if you can start to train this in a trainer, it starts to make a difference with how you choose gears when you're outside, especially in an adventure racing situation on a long climb or a long flat, because it is a kind of different dynamic in how your muscles are working if you're doing a higher cadence, which can increase the heart rate, right? Just those quick twitch muscles when you're trying to hold 100 cadence, like your heart rate's going to go up a little bit until you train it. Eventually, you can train to have a high cadence, a more moderate heart rate. I've experienced this, a greater availability for changing things up in the middle of a long expedition race, if that makes sense. And that's a very valuable thing, because just like we talked on this podcast before, like changing your position on the bike by using a dropper seat post, right? By having these micro changes in your body position can alleviate overuse or starting to get sore spots or just fatigue.
It's the same thing with flat pedals. You can do micro shifts on, okay, is my toe in, out, and that can sometimes help with the knee pain or whatnot. Same thing with, crank lengths can help sometimes too with hips.
We're going to talk about crank lengths in a second, because that's the other thing that I found with the esports. But, I feel like I enjoy expedition racing more and long, especially when I'm fatigued. No, the more I've trained in cadence, I don't just have a default cadence. I used to always have a default cadence, like 80. Right now in my mind, I have like my slow cadence, which is around 60. My normal cadence was 80 to 85. And my fast cadence, where I am actually want ease in the legs, faster turnover, but less power for the same speed. You know, this was an experience that basically made me realize how much I like being able to choose my cadence when I'm fatigued in different ways. So it made me think about, hey, this is a valuable thing for adventure racing, right? To at least think about through the winter, because we're coming into the winter. I don't know when this podcast will come out. Maybe it'll come out in the summer, but hopefully in the winter when more of us will be on a trainer, right? But now you brought up crank lengths.
Yep.
Tell me about crank lengths and why people should reconsider. Maybe.
Crank is where it's like that shaft that connects the pedal to the bike. So it spins around, right? Usually crank lengths are between 165 to 175 millimeters for the most part.
Well, and that's for one reason. That's because the bike industry is lazy and they only wanted to make 3 lengths and force everybody, even though every other part of the bike is micro adjustable, right? The seat post is adjustable by millimeters, the stem length, all this stuff. And then there's like, oh, we can fit everybody in the whole world into 3 crank lengths, 165, 170, or 175. So you're totally correct about that.
Yep. And so what you're looking at is the amount of power that you're putting into the bike by pushing on the pedal is then actioned through there to spin kind of that front crank essentially and get the actual chain moving and put power to the back tire, right? So if you think about a lever arm, right? You hear like that phrase, okay, give me a lever long enough, I'll move the world. The longer that lever is, the more power you can put in, but the slower it takes you to go around in a circle.
Yep.
So it's longer and the circle distance is longer, the circumference.
Yeah. So your cadence for any set power will be slower. The other thing that I didn't know about till I started to experiment with it is it also gives you a bigger dead spot, right? Because of the action of your legs and hips and knee bend, right? The longer the crank is, like the more power you have in the position where you're basically perpendicular to that push, but then you have a longer dead spot where you're not putting any force. So it's a less smooth pedal stroke, right? Then with a shorter crank, which spins faster, you get less power for each push, but you get power through a bigger range of that arc. So for climbing, like if you've ever think back to the, when you're climbing, there's a lot of the, the making sure you have power with the pawl. So you're like kind of half pedaling, right? Like get up over things. With short cranks, that becomes much less of an issue because you have a more constant power distribution through your drivetrain. So it actually makes, for most people, it makes climbing technical stuff easier with shorter cranks.
Exactly. And that's where if you're hitting a rock garden, right? And you get to that point to where you kind of hit something and kind of stop and your pedal's in the wrong spot and you don't have any power right away and you get off balance, that gap there is when you are in a dead spot. And so if you have a shorter crank, there's shorter distance. And so you have way less time in that dead spot. So you pedal faster. And now when you hit there, you have way less time before you get power and can push through there. Whereas with the longer one, you have more of that gap, right? And on the counter side, let's say you're on flat road with a road bike. If you have that longer crank, you in theory can push some more power with each pedal stroke than you can with the shorter one.
Right. The fascinating thing is, like, I really looked at it, as a mountain biker, like, oh, there's less pedal strikes, like I can climb a little bit better. But, I'm always looking at, we've talked about this a bunch on this podcast, but like for cycling, the science is coming out of the Tour de France, right? Because there's so much money in that, and the stakes are
Just the
so
leading edge
high.
for biking.
Yeah, and road cyclists are leading the movement in shorter cranks. It's not mountain bikers, right? It is road cyclists that are continually going to shorter and shorter cranks because the power efficiency over time, even though you get a little bit less power in those sprints, and it's not the sprinters. Generally, the sprinters are kind of keeping the long cranks, but the people that are trying to win the GC, that are trying to stay consistent over days and days and days of 4 to 8 hour days, are using shorter cranks because it increases your overall pedaling efficiency and maintainable power, right? And so
Yeah. And a lot of
that's
that comes yeah, a lot of that comes in the biomechanics, right?
sure.
Imagine you're back squatting with heavy weight, right? When you're at the bottom where your butt's the lowest to the ground
And
and
your
you're
knee has
pushing
the
out,
biggest, yeah, you've got a big
yeah,
knee
your
bend
your
angle.
knees are at that 90 or so and you're pushing out. It's way harder than when you're at the top and you're pushing the last 25% to get up, right? And so that's a mechanical advantage. And so that top part, you notice your knee angle isn't as severe and you have more power to go because you have a better mechanical advantage. With the shorter pedal, you're not going as high. And so you're in that more mechanical advantage part through the entire stroke. You're not going nearly as much to like 90, we'll say, even though you shouldn't be that high. Whereas the longer one, your range of mechanical advantage varies to where you're in more of a disadvantage for periods of time too.
Yeah, the test that I did at one point, which one of my coaches had me do when I was considering this, was, because a lot of people are like, oh, I'll just go 165. But any guess what I use now on my race bike?
I'm going to say you use 155 or something weird.
Yeah, I use a 155. Uh, they're hard to find, but you can find them kids cranks. You can find Shimano compatible kids cranks for kids bikes. They're pretty light too. So Chelsea and I are both on our race bikes, running Goldix, like $60 cranks that are made for kids bikes, and they're awesome. You can you can get the carbon fiber SRAM 165s or 160. There's a lot more companies that are making high end short mountain bike cranks now. But the cool exercise that I did that kind of convinced me was I was at my PT at the gym, and they had me doing single leg pistol squats, which is hard for me anyway with my hips, right? But so they basically had a normal size bench that would take me down to just below 90, right? And then go back up. So like how many single leg pistol squats? Not very many for me, right? And then they just continually increase that by a centimeter, right? Like that I would touch the bench a centimeter higher. And then, once I got up to like a couple centimeters above that 90 bend, my number of reps that I could do before fatigue basically was, increasing from like 2 or 3 reps to like 50, right?
Yep, exactly.
And it's not quite the same because you're not putting that much force in biking, but it just shows you that hip angle and knee angle makes a huge difference. And so if I'm doing 10,000 pedal strokes in a long race, if I could be at that place where there's a lot more strength and stability, and even though I have to pedal faster, I'd much rather be there. And obviously you don't want to go super short. Like you're going to be spinning like a freaking hamster. And like I said in the story, I don't want to be spinning 120 cadence too fast, right?
Yeah, and you also have to look at the individual. So I'm short. Dan is super tall, right? You expect Dan to use 155 might be too short for him,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And then another thing to think about too is, a lot is hip angle, right? So if you think of your thighs being parallel, at that 90 are going to put, and one's all the way down further, the more difference you have in space, the more that hip is tilting. And so the shorter the crank, the less it's going to tilt. And so you can kind of get differences in that hip angle and how wide the hip is and things like that based on that difference too. And so, that's one way if you're having issues, you can kind of examine what that looks like. And also if you're using a 170, 175 and you're super short, like you probably want to drop. If you're super tall, maybe stick with a normal one that you got.
Yeah. And that's, I think, but I think going back to the bike industry with that 165, 170, 175, that's a very, between the shortest standard kind of stock crank length, 165 to 175 is, I did the math before this podcast, but now I can't remember, but it's a very, very small percentage, like 3% difference, right? Like it's a less than 5%. Oh, you could do it. Are you like the
Well, when you think about it though, right? It's 10 centimeters difference on one, but when you have one up and one down, that's a 20 centimeter difference of total distance between the two legs, which is significant because you have to double it.
and the thing that really kind of, I guess it bothers me is like, so you've got most bikes, like the difference between sizes from an extra small frame to an extra large frame, all the different components that you're dialing in to make the bike fit your biomechanics have a much bigger range than 3%. Right? If you look at a 30 millimeter stem to a 90 millimeter stem, like that's a 300% range of choices you have, right? When you look at top tube length, when you look at, everything like seat tube height, distance, all these things have a huge range of percentage to dial it in. And now we've built cranks that basically say, oh, are you here or are you 3% different here? Right? Most racers, I would say, the next time you do a bike fit or the next time you're upgrading, like really think about what you want your cranks to be. And there's a great resource. Appleman's is a company out of Minnesota. Appleman's cranks. I think they now have a crank product that is a single crank that will fit most bikes that has holes drilled. So the same crank, it kind of looks weird. You can try out cranks from 150 to 175 by just putting your pedals in different holes. And you can rent them now for like 40 or 50 bucks. They're out of stock a lot because a lot of people are doing this now, but like you can rent these crank things so that you can put them on your mountain bike and go try before you buy. They're freaking awesome. So when I get people to say, hey, I really want to do this 200-mile bike packing trip, or I really want to do this big thing, like one of the first things, if they're having any pain or issues or not meeting the power that they want, or I'm like, let's look at your bike fit and let's look at your cranks and let's look at what cadence you're training, because those two things together, understanding cadence variations and understanding crank length, I think, through those long winters. And this is the problem with my nice trainer bike. Like it's not my bike on a trainer. It's like one of those Zwift trainer bikes, and it comes stock with 175 millimeter cranks, which are not changeable. So it's a great deal, but for me, it's hard to race on. So I'm going to switch to racing on Chelsea's bike, which has those Appleman cranks, so that I can take the power pedals off and I can change crank length based on her on the same bike. And, because when I had that experience of being on a single speed with 175 millimeter cranks racing in the esports world, it was humbling and it was painful. And those are valuable things for any cycling athlete, I think.
I love it. We need to do another quick hit on another call that maybe we deep dive FTP and wattage. There's a lot of info out there, and I think a little bit of knowledge can really clarify a lot of stuff and then, get people less confused.
And before you do that, Nick, you need to tell me how I can increase my FTP. This is kind of a loaded question because I know there's no easy way, but I want you to pretend there is an easy way so that you can tell me one thing I can do just one time and make my FTP go up. And I want I want everybody else to just think that Nick is right and that it doesn't take hard work and training. So Nick, yeah.
One thing, okay.
No, don't tell me now. I want you to think about it. I want you to think about it if there's something. Because I have one thing too, and we can like get some athletes to try it out and see which one works. I don't think either of them will work, but that's the goal. For the FTP podcast, we're gonna
the one magic pill.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna go against all of our science-based and experiential training and give people a magic pill at the end. But we're actually gonna tell them what's really important first. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So that's it. So let's go. We've done an awesome podcast today. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Take care.